right, Madam Chair, we're now live.
Thank you. State Board will come back to order. Ms. Marambo, would you please call the roll?
Board Member Durham.
Here.
Board Member Escarcega.
Here.
Board Member Esser. You here? Here, okay. Board Member McClellan.
Here.
Board Member Rankin. Board Member Rankin.
Here.
Board Member Shuffle.
Excuse.
Board Member Schroeder.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us today. We have a total of 2 pending bills to discuss today, which we will address as individual agenda items. But first, we'll let Ms. Mello provide us with a brief legislative update. Ms. Mello.
Sorry, Ms. Mello was just plugging her computer in real quick so it didn't die on us in the middle of this phone call, which has happened to me a couple times recently. Thank you, Madam Chair. So we're, I guess, kind of halfway through session. It's a little hard to measure because it's such a strange year. We are being told that they're going to try to finish by the end of May. Try is a really important word there. I'm still not making travel plans for early June, but they have to finish by June 14th. So June 14th would be the latest possible date that we would go, and maybe we'll be able to get out a little sooner. You know, they are moving fast, and it's been a really interesting pace because it's not the breakneck pace of, you know, we're going to introduce bills and pass them in 3 days, and, you know, it's just so challenging to figure out what's happening in that kind of a scenario when it's like that. But they're moving along. You know, bills get introduced and they're heard in committee the next week and they're on the floor the next week. And, you know, it has been a sustained busy pace. We're hoping that means the end of session isn't quite so chaotic as it normally is. But personally, I think that's going to be a false hope. So just prepare yourself that it'll probably still be chaotic. In terms of K-12, we've really, and we've talked about this a little bit before, I think a lot of the energy and work on some really big important issues happened very early in session, which we don't normally necessarily see. Obviously, with the legislation around state assessments and the submission of that waiver to the feds, that has taken up a whole lot of the oxygen for everybody in K-12. And so from a legislative perspective, it's done already. That's unusual to be able to say that, given the intensity of how people feel about the issue, given the scope of it, it would be completely off our plates legislatively. Again, I want to be clear legislatively, because I'm not saying there's not lots of other work that goes on around that is interesting. We're going to talk obviously about a couple of bills, but we've had overall about 500 bills introduced so far. We anticipate another couple hundred coming. So we're not done yet. The budget should be being finalized today. I don't know. I see a smile on a face that tells me that that maybe that's what's going to happen today. The plan is the budget will be finalized today. The budget committee met till very late last night, working towards that goal. It will be introduced in the Senate on April 5th. So there's basically a week kind of gap there where they do all the incredibly hard work that JBC staff does to pull all this stuff together and make it legislation. It'll get introduced on the 5th. It'll start in the Senate. In addition to the long bill, which is the budget bill, we will have a bunch of what we call satellite bills that will kind of go through the process with the budget. They are JBC committee bills. They kind of travel all together. One of those will be an extension of continuous spending authority for the Teacher Cass Licensure Fund. That's something we've talked with you all about, and I'm happy to report that we were successful in having the JBC adopt that as one of their bills to move through. And so it's a technical thing, but it's pretty important to the functioning of that particular area of the department. And so we're really grateful to our JBC legislators for saying yes to that and working that one through. I think that's it for general overview. If there's any questions about that, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you, Ms. Mello. I'll go down the line and see if you all have questions. Board Member Escarcega.
Thank you. And not at this point. I don't have any questions. Thank you.
Right. Board Member Rankin?
No, I don't have any questions. I just have kind of an observation that Ms. Mello can cover for me. How many of the legislators are in person now, or do you have any rough estimate or guesstimate about that? I'm just wondering if they're coming or if they're still online.
It's a mix, right? I think there's a handful that almost never come. I mean, they participate remotely, so I'm not suggesting they're not participating. I think it's a pretty small number that are really completely out of the building all the time. There's others that are out of the building most of the time, right? For safety reasons, they just feel like that's what they need to do. But if they have a bill that they're presenting in committee, they'll come in that day for that. I don't think it's a huge percentage, actually. I mean, I think most of the work is happening in person at this point. We're starting to see more and more lobbyists in the building, which, who cares? It's a sign, I would say, of kind of a return to normalcy. I think gradually the building is returning to a more normal, what we would consider to be normal kind of amount of people around. But it's been a gradual, I think part of it is just as more and more people get vaccinated, right? More and more people are comfortable showing up, so.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Board Member McClellan?
Nothing for me, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Board Member Esser?
Thank you, Madam Chair. No questions.
Board Member Durham?
No questions, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Mello, haven't all the legislators been vaccinated?
All the legislators who could be vaccinated. Some of them chose not to, but they were all offered that. I think. I mean, I guess I've talked to a handful of them. So, I mean, these vaccines are still relatively new, right? And so we don't have perfect information about whether, even if you've been vaccinated, if you could be infected and then spread that. And the folks that tend to be staying out of the building a lot are people who either have pretty significant health conditions of their own or live with somebody who does. And I think are probably just making that risk decision for themselves of really not being willing to take that, which is, my personal, I keep saying we all get to make our own decisions about the level of risk we're willing to accept in this scenario.
Got it. Okay, I was just curious if they're down there in their offices, et cetera, and their staffs are vaccinated. But that's not likely, is it?
I don't know where staff is on the list. I mean, some staff were able to get vaccinated, some were not. It kind of depended on the category.
Okay.
It's also a public building though, right? I mean, we have people coming in to testify on bills that, because they care about them, that, who knows what their vaccination status is. We do have a screening we go through every morning. Like, we're all getting so good at having our temperature taken. And we also have access to free rapid testing. It's the BitMax, or I don't think it's called BitMax, but it's something like that. Every Tuesday and Thursday, anyone who works in the building can go in and get a free test. So they've tried to put things in place to minimize the spread as much as they can. And people wear masks, and there's definitely more distancing than normal.
Good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's move on to the legislation that we wanted to talk about. Ms. Mello will introduce each item and provide a brief overview. And then I'll open it up for discussion. And I believe we also have staff to answer any technical questions for us. Ms. Mello?
Yes. If you don't mind, I would like to start with, because I'm not remembering exactly what order the agenda is. Do you have a preference, Madam Chair, actually?
The first item was supposed to be 119, access to high quality credentials. Does that work for you?
Sure. Yep, it does. Okay, so this is a bill. We did speak briefly about this at our last gathering. We had given you guys notice about this, I think less than 24 hours before that meeting. And so some of you were just, hadn't had a chance to look at it, weren't sure what you thought about it. So it's the same bill that we've discussed previously. We're bringing it back to you now. Hopefully you've had a little bit more time. This is Senate Bill 119, increasing access to high quality credentials. The bill is already out of the first committee, which is the Senate Education Committee. It passed out of their I believe it was unanimously. I can double check that. If not, there was only one no vote. The sponsors of the bill are Senators Jeff Bridges and Senators Paul Lundeen. And I'm trying to pull up this really quick, lovely little summary I have of the bill. There it is. It is a long bill. I want to acknowledge that. From a CDE K-12 perspective, not all of it is super connected to our work. Some of it is. For us, it makes some technical changes to the existing Career Development Incentives Program. It works to connect in-demand credentials for Colorado jobs that pay well with the high school courses and concurrent enrollment, right? So that instead of doing concurrent enrollment courses in less demand or lower paying jobs, we're focusing more on the places where people could get work and would be paid well. And that ensures transferability of these credentials into higher education. So that's kind of the brief summary of the legislation. Your legislative contacts are recommending a support position on the bill, and happy to have any discussion.
Thank you, Board Member Durham. Do you want to start the discussion on this bill? No.
Yeah,
Member
no,
McClellan,
I think I think we looked at it carefully, and I think I think we concluded it merited support. It's I hope a way to really improve offerings to students who are not necessarily college bound, but would have an opportunity to have good careers in jobs that are well paying.
Thank you. Board Member McClellan.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. I would just renew all the positive observations that I made in our last discussion. I hope this has slowing this process down has given board members a chance to kind of check in and see if they have any concerns or questions about it. But I'm especially appreciative that this bill would bridge the gap between what skills and qualifications there's a market for here in Colorado, and what students can kind of weigh before they before they pursue those qualifications. And it's also done with a sensitivity to the business community and an eye toward what they're looking for, so we can do this in a more intelligent way, so that people who are walking out the door of their educational experience have something that's marketable, and so the business community can know that what we're preparing students for is something they can that is useful to the Colorado economy and very much needed, and something that will produce a living wage for them. So I'm a strong support, and when you're ready, let me know. I have our motion ready.
Right. Board Member, any questions, comments, thoughts?
Did you call on me?
Rankin.
Oh, right. Okay, good. I couldn't, there was a glitch there. Sorry.
I thank you for that, Board Member Skarsky. I had the same glitch. I thought it might be you. Ms. Miller, does this supplement what is already there, or does it supplant? Does this committee get a list that they review every year, and is it a list of 20, a list of 30, or does it just add in? Do all students have access to all of the coursework that's on the list?
I'm going to phone a friend and see if Misty Ruthven can turn her camera and microphone on and help us understand that better.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Please go ahead.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Board Member Rankin, for your great question. So this builds on an existing set of credentials that are identified through a talent pipeline report that's a multi-agency collaborative report. And then hopefully through, if this bill were to pass, that there would be some consistency provided for the opportunities that you're seeking.
So I guess the question is, does it supplement what's already there? My concern is that a student has looked into this ahead of time, has an idea of a course, and then these other courses come up that they didn't want, but are they obligated to not have the ones that they already had in mind, even if they're not of that high paying caliber? Supplement or supplant?
Correct. So this would likely supplement existing concurrent enrollment efforts to allow for those pathways to be built that lead toward the high-paying jobs.
And then is it a limited, like if something isn't on that list, but it is offered at a school nearby, is that up to the high school and college, or is that part of, I guess you call it local control to adapt, even though something may not be on the list or something may come up?
You're exactly right. Those would be local district and school decisions.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Board Member Escarzaga?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Member Rankin asked my question, so that's perfect. Thank you.
Okey doke. And Board Member Esser?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Mello, can you give us some idea of what some of these credentials have been or are going to be?
No, but Missy can.
Thank you. Madam Chair, would you like me to dive in? Thank you.
Go ahead.
Dr. Esser, thank you for your question. So these cycle through, and I can give you general high-level examples and then send you the list if that's useful. It's really based on the labor market index, which is a look led by the Colorado Department of Labor and Employment about what jobs and what job descriptions are most in demand across our state. And then there's some nuance within regions of our state as well. So essentially, consistently, IT, information technology, coding, some of those credentials have been consistently some of the top jobs and top jobs needs across our state. So the technical in nature jobs. And then we also see jobs that are fairly consistent, such as the technical skills of electricians, plumbers, right, welders, as well as nurses. So those are examples of some of the top jobs and then credentials that would lead to those top jobs.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you, colleagues. I guess the comment that I would make is that as I read about career readiness and opportunities for students, one of the critiques is often that there is a lack of alignment between what's needed out there and what's being offered in the schools. And it seems to me this bill addresses this directly and strengthens our program. So I think this is really something that we should strongly support. I would entertain a motion, please.
Madam Chair, I move to support SB 21-119, access to high quality credentials.
The proper motion. Do I have a second, please?
Second.
Thank you. Ms. Maramba, would you please call the roll?
Board Member Durham,
Yes.
Board Member Escarzaga,
Yes.
Board Member Esser,
Yes.
Board Member McClellan,
Yes.
Board Member Rankin,
Yes.
Board Member Shuffle is excused, and then Board Member Schroeder.
Yes.
So that passes 6-0 with 1 excused.
Thank you very much. Next item is presentation on House Bill 21-1067, college use of national test scores. Ms. Mello.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we've talked about this bill several times. I think I come bearing good news. You may remember that as originally introduced, the bill was actually quite simple and would have simply eliminated the current requirement and statute for Colorado institutions of higher ed to use a national test score as part of their admissions process. Universities and colleges could have asked for that, but they wouldn't have had to do so if the legislation had passed in its original form. Acknowledging there were some different perspectives on the board on this bill, we can just acknowledge that that is true. We came to you about a month ago and asked you to take an amend position on the bill and talked about some of the changes we would seek. That's what you all did. We spent quite a bit of time negotiating, and I really want to thank some of our partners in higher ed, particularly the folks at CU Boulder and Fort Lewis College were really helpful in the negotiations and have the bill is, just so you know, is out of committee now with these changes embedded in the bill. And as a result of that, we're going to suggest that you go to a neutral position. But let me describe the changes that were made. The first one is that we inserted language that explicitly allows it to be a student's choice. So a student has the right to submit a score if they want to and have it considered as part of their admissions criteria. I think that one speaks particularly to some of you have an underlying concern about how this impacts the relevancy of our high school testing. And that language is, I think, designed to try to address that issue a little bit so that we maybe have less of an impact on the relevancy of the high school test. The second, I mean, it's a little bit long in terms of how it's written, but what the goal was and what the language does is require some data collection and a report that allow us, the board, the department, the whole wide world, anyone who cares, to really understand whether this change in policy is having the impact that the proponents would like it to have, right? So the main argument in favor of the bill is that will increase equity and diversity. And so we were able to come to an agreement on some data collection and reporting that will just let us all figure out if it's doing that. The report will actually be produced by the Department of Higher Ed instead of every institution doing that. They've centralized it, and that was thank you to our partners at DHE for their willingness to kind of play that role. There are some data elements that we had talked about including that were not in there. So we don't have first generation and we don't have Pell eligibility. We wanted those, we tried for those. There may be others who are still working to have those in the bill. You know, you get to a point in negotiations where you kind of have to make a decision, right? And, they had really worked in great faith with us, and it was just our determination that we were at the place where we had achieved the board's goal the goal of many of our board members, I'm trying to choose my language carefully here, to be able to evaluate the program and to ensure that students could submit a score. So that's kind of the long story of what the bill looks like right now. I think it passed, it actually passed the House on third reading this morning. So it'll be over in the Senate next. Your legislative contacts are recommending that we go from an amend position to a neutral position. That was kind of part of the negotiations, and I'm happy to answer any questions and turn it over to Steve and Rebecca.
Thank you, Ms. Mello. Board Member McClellan, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate your efforts on this one, Ms. Mello, and on all of the work you do on our behalf across the street. I did want to touch on, I understand we did not get tracking data that we're wanting for first generation students and Pell eligibility numbers. Can you kind of just give us a reminder of what we got in terms of equity tracking? Because we didn't get nothing in that area. Although, and I do think that the big win for us is that it's student driven, that they can submit their scores. I just want to be sure that this stays relevant, because I would not want Colorado students who may not be able to afford these expensive test fees to find that they were in a position where they were out of the running for all kinds of nationwide merit-based opportunities. So I just wanted to put that out there firstly, and also to touch on what we are getting for tracking for equity purposes.
Sure. I'm just trying to pull the bill up. If you talked just a little bit longer, I would have been.
Quite all right. I can probably talk a little bit longer. And this is not a disappointment in you. I am a little bit disappointed that we would ever have resistance to any kind of a transparency effort, because that always makes me feel like if we're supposed to be so sure that throwing the tests out of the way means that it's going to be more equitable, then why would it be problematic to get the data with respect to first generation students and Pell eligibility? But you don't have to respond to that. I think I'm disappointed to see that there would ever be resistance to that transparency, but I am anxious to hear what transparency we did get.
Yes, and I now have that in front of me. So thank you for more minutes.
I filled, stretch, right?
You are all elected officials / politicians, so usually you talking for a couple more minutes is a huge problem. Okay, so let's see. Here's one of the key things is there's a requirement that we get the data by who submitted and who didn't, right? Because otherwise you can't really tell the impact of the policy. And I will tell you that was one that was the subject of a fair amount of negotiation, was to be able to get to that point of we've got to be able to compare these two populations. So we have that. Let's see, the percentage of first-time freshman students, both statewide and by institution, who submitted or did not submit a national assessment test score, disaggregated by race, ethnicity, and gender. So it's basically, applicant pool, and then it's those who actually enroll, because not everybody who applies ends up enrolling. And then, and this is, I think, the other thing that was pretty important, is looking at persistence and completion by those same breakdowns, right? So after 1 year, are they still there? After 2 years, are they still there? After 3 years, are they still there? After 4 years, have they graduated? Because part of what came up in the conversations is it's one thing to admit somebody, it's another thing to make sure they're successful, right? And we want to focus on both of those in terms of our equity outcomes. So the explanation for the Pell Eligible and the first gen, it wasn't, I don't know, I wouldn't go so far as to say that they don't want to be transparent in that. The way the data collection systems are set up, it's different, right? So the stuff that is in the bill now is stuff that is already part of an existing data collection system and can be, I don't know, I'm not a data person, like pulled out or disaggregated, or I don't know, Dr. Escarzaga would know all the right words here. But those other two variables aren't part of that system. And so that's why they were hesitant to do that. Now, again, I think that there will be some folks in the Senate who are going to try to insert that. So we'll see what happens. It may very well end up in the bill after all.
Okay, thank you.
Board Member Durham, do you have any comments?
Well, I think I'm just not sure we're getting the right data. I mean, theoretically, I presume that the schools, the colleges wanted this because they intend to admit kids who they would not have admitted if they had to put the test score in the mix. And that doesn't correlate to those who did or did not submit a test score. So I think we have the wrong data. I mean, I think what we're trying to find out is you admit kids that you would not have admitted otherwise. How do they do? A, how many of them do you admit? And then B, how many of those kids benefit from being admitted? That is, they finish their education. So, Jennifer, I think it's the wrong data. I think it's the wrong data point. Hate to tell you at this point.
That's new. That's a new piece of information for me, Steve. So I'm just processing through and trying to think about that.
Well, I presume. I mean, whether or not they submit a test score is irrelevant. The question is, would they've been admitted? That's, at least I think that's the question. Maybe I'm missing something here.
Yeah, I'm trying to think on my feet quickly enough to. I mean, I understand the question and the concern, and I'm trying to think a little bit about it. Madam Chair, maybe if you could give me a minute to kind of catch up mentally. It looks like maybe that we have some other questions or comments that that might help.
Sure. Board Member Escarzaga, I saw your hand flying around.
I think I would just kind of to follow up with Member Durham's question. What it would take is then it's not the state providing the data, the Department of Ed, it's higher ed that's providing the data for this collection. if students aren't turning in the scores, they don't know if that student as a junior took the test actually would have qualified to go in or not. So I think the issue is that I understand what he's saying, and it would make an interesting research question. The data would have to come from the Department of Ed based on their junior testing. The university won't have it. So I think that's probably why again, if they're trying to get the universities to report the data, they won't have it. That's it. But it's a very interesting question he asks.
Board Member
Well,
Rankin.
maybe,
Oh, go ahead, Mr. Durham.
no,
Go
I
ahead.
think, well, I mean, maybe we could fill that piece in. We don't need legislation to do it. We might be able to fill that piece in, I'm not sure. Because we're going to get some persistence data. Might be a little more complicated for us. I don't know. But I think Board Member Skarsgård is correct. That's right, that if somebody doesn't take the test, which they're not obligated to do to get in, although I presume most kids that want to get in will take the test, but if they don't report it, if they elect not to have it reported, then you're exactly right. We have the data and the universities don't.
And I'm getting just some text from your staff that, there could be some combining here, some staff research that could occur. So I think that's an option.
Ms. Mello, could you check with staff whether students maintain the same student number when they go to Colorado Higher Ed? Please.
Maybe we could just ask Misty right now.
Yay.
Not to put her on the spot. I don't know if she knows or not, but she's more likely to know than I am.
The short answer is no, that they do not have the same identifier that they do in higher education. The longer answer is it's possible potentially, right, through research where the same student that was coming from a ABC high school could be identified as going to XYZ college, which would be a research project.
It's not just a research project. This is what we care about, is that these kids know that they'll be able to succeed, or the colleges know that they have to do more intervention in order for them to succeed. This is kind of a bigger issue than just what this bill does. I think Board Member Rankin, I thought I called on you. Did you ask all your questions?
No, I didn't ask any yet, but I do have a couple.
Go for it, please.
Does this, Ms. Mello, does this prohibit a college from requiring the SAT to get in?
No.
Not according to the score or anything, but if they say, okay, this is my university and we require them to send it in if they want to go here. Can a college still do that?
Yes, they can still require it. They're just not forced to require it.
Okay, so they can require it, but the student can still send in an application, but not send in that test score. Because that's optional for the student.
Well, not quite. So if the institution requires a score, then a student would have to submit that score to be considered for admission.
Okay.
It's when the institution does not require a score that the student can be proactive in saying, but I want you, I mean, presumably you're going to do this if you did well on the test, right? Probably
Yes.
not going to do it if you didn't do so well.
Yes.
I want you to look at my really great SAT score, so I'm going to include that. And the way that the language is written is that they have to, I mean, we wrote it not just that they have to let them submit it, they have to consider it too.
Nice.
So it's not just kind of a, circular file type of thing.
Yes, I appreciate that. Thank you. And then I have another question. Do we have records now of students that are from low income? In other words, across the board, they can't afford to take the SAT, but their college material? I mean, board member.
I don't know the direct answer to that question. I'm happy to have Misty chime in. I will say that, part of, as part of the testing that we have in state law for K-12, in high school, students are given, I believe, and again, somebody else jump in if I don't have these details quite right, an opportunity at least once to take the SAT for free.
I thought, I concur. That's the way I understood it, but Board Member McClellan made the statement that there are students that can't afford to take the test, and that's why they wouldn't submit it. But I just wanted to be clear that we do give that opportunity at least once.
Yes.
And I appreciate that. And you mentioned, and I want you to clarify this, some students will apply to 10 colleges, let's say, and maybe some they submit their scores and others they don't, but they only choose that one college they want to go to. Those are the scores we're using in this bill. Is that not correct? Only, I mean, we aren't counting low income or any of these other things until they actually go to the college.
I think I understand the question, and well, we're actually doing both. So they're required to look at just, who submitted a score when they didn't have to. Or who submitted a score, I suppose. And they're required to look at it for those enrolled. So it's both populations. It's both the total applicant pool and those who enrolled.
Okay, so, and those scores are separated, and those are the reports that higher ed is going to give to us, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep. Yes.
Thank you very much. I think that's all. Yep, that's all. Thank you.
Board Member Escarzaga, did you have any other additional comments or questions?
I had one and then now it's gone. So
I'm happy to come back to you. Go ahead and take a chill.
Thank you.
Board Member Esser?
I think Board Member Rankin asked most of the questions I have. I just wanted to make sure we're still requiring or offering 11th graders the SAT at no charge through the state, so they would have it if they want it. I just want to go on the record with there is an issue of cultural and socioeconomic bias in this test. That's why it was called the Scholastic Aptitude Test, even though it's really hard to test aptitude as opposed to memorization. So that was how this came up to begin with. And it started back in 1923. It's not new. It's almost 100 years old. So just wanted to make that clear. So thank you.
Thank you. Board Member McClellan?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to touch on Board Member Rankin's catch that I did mention. Students affording a college entrance exam. We didn't always have our official test be a college entrance exam. And my concern is that as we shifted toward the college entrance exam test requirement for the 11th grade testing, we then shifted into a position where opt-outs went down in the largest collection point of tested students, in other words, the high school students, because at least in my district, the strongest contingent in the opt-out movement is, from what I can see, generally really concentrated in upper middle class schools where parents, in many cases, are already paying thousands of dollars sometimes for test prep to get the best scores possible for their kids. So those communities are a lot less likely to take an extra free bite at the apple off the table for their child if they're already going out of their way to pay for test prep. So I guess what I'm trying to say is any move to make that testing less relevant might inadvertently cause a diminishment of the relevance of that test, which could then put us right back where we had been with respect to giant holes being blown in the data through the opt-out movement. And I don't want giant holes blown through the data. The only folks who are served when big holes are blown through the data are people who don't want any change whatsoever with respect to equity. And I can just tell you that's not me. I want to make sure that we're doing a better job for students who need this test and for students who need this test to show what they did and didn't get out of their public education. So thanks for pointing that out. I should have been more clear about why I'm concerned about this. And that goes beyond the scope of this bill. It's my concern that I want to make sure that this isn't putting our foot onto a slippery slope to make this assessment, this test irrelevant. Thanks.
Thank you. Board Member Escarzaga.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. I got kicked off the internet. It's called my husband unplugged the modem. Anyway, I'm going to go along with some of what Dr. Esser said. I do support the bill. I can appreciate the comments about wanting to know if kids have what they were expected to have leaving high school. I truly appreciate that. I would love to find a better, less biased way to do that. So I kind of see in the middle. I think a neutral position on this bill is fine. We are, there are over 1,600 colleges that are now test optional at this point. We are not alone in thinking that something needs to be tweaked about this process. So with that, that's all. But I don't have any more questions, so thank you so much.
Thank you. Board Member Durham, do you have any more comments or concerns?
Well, I think if we go neutral on this bill, it should be with the understanding we're going to try to fill this gap with our own data and perhaps using some of the higher ed data that we can access to determine whether or not these kids that have been admitted have finished and whether the ability to benefit students, which I think I'm not even sure if you would call them that, but would somehow be that they're. I mean, we all know that at least I believe I know that this is strictly about how to get for the schools to get more warm bodies in the door. The question is, are they going to provide them a service or a disservice? Because if they don't get them out the door, they've provided them a pretty serious disservice. And I think the test, there may be some bias to it, but I don't think there's a huge bias to it. And kids that don't do well in that test, there's a pretty significant correlation to not doing well once they're in school. And that's just a fact. Now, you can dispute that if you wish, but I think the numbers would bear out that if you don't do well in the test, you're not likely to do well in school.
Thank you.
And I think Ms. McClellan is exactly right about one thing, that our biggest single interest is trying to make sure we have relevant data, and that the use of this test help reduce opt-outs dramatically. I don't know whether this change in policy is going to do that or not. But if we go back to high opt-outs, then we have a problem with our own data. And we have our own problem with federal compliance of meeting 95% participation.
Thank you. I see a hand, but I'll just make a couple of comments. I'm very inclined to agree with Mr. Durham. The reason 1,600 schools have changed their policy is because students have stopped enrolling in a lot of colleges. The costs are too high. So whether this actually increases equity or diversity is essentially a leap of faith, which we can do that, but I think we are obligated now to look very, very carefully to see what happens to our Colorado kids that come into Colorado colleges, because I really am not confident it's going to necessarily increase diversity in the schools, and I'm even more concerned about whether the schools will step up to help the kids that really aren't ready to do the kind of work that's expected in college. And so I have real concerns about this. I'm not going to stand in the way. I don't like it. I don't think it's a great idea. On the other hand, philosophically, I don't know that higher ed should be obligated. I mean, I think higher ed probably ought to have the freedom to decide what their entrance requirements are. That's sort of my philosophical belief. And what they should be held accountable for is not the inputs or the intakes, but to make sure that the kids graduate. And in that area, we're not in a very good place in Colorado. We need to be better. And I hope that by increasing the diversity, we really don't end up in a worse position than we are right now. So that's my big worry about this. Board Member Rankin, I see your hand.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for that. I agree wholeheartedly with what you said. And along those same lines, Ms. Mello, I don't know if this is in the bill. I'm sure it isn't, but maybe this will go through higher ed. I would like to know how they gather their data at the end of what they're expected to do, how they went about gathering their data, and then what the data shows at the end. Because of course we're looking at all the colleges in Colorado rather than a survey. That's really important as to how they get their data. Thank you. That's all.
Board Member McClellan, would you make a motion, please?
Sure, Madam Chair, thank you. I move to change the board's position from amend to neutral for House Bill 21-1067, college use of national test scores.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
Ms. Maramba, would you be kind enough to call the roll?
Board Member Durham.
Yes.
Board Member Skarziga.
Yes.
Board Member Esser.
Yes.
Board Member McClellan.
Yes.
Board Member Rankin.
Yes.
Board Member Schroeder.
Yes.
It passes 6-0 with 1 excused.
Thank you. Ms. Mello, is there anything additional for us?
Not today, but I'm sure there will be soon. I do want to say just one quick thing. I know when I send out the weekly reports, a couple of you have had problems with the link and the bill link. There's a problem with my vendor. Sorry, we're trying to get it fixed. But if you're trying to pull that up and you're having problems, don't hesitate to let me know, because usually we can find a way to get you what you're looking for in the short run quickly while we go try to resolve the larger vendor issue. So sorry about that.
Thank you. So colleagues, that ends our meeting for today. We resume on April 14th. I look forward to seeing you all then.
Have a
Bye-bye.
great weekend, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.